The morning sky over Bavaria hung thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning diesel. Major Robert MacCallister gripped the yoke of his A-26B Invader with white-knuckled hands, the aircraft's twin Pratt & Whitney engines roaring a mechanical symphony that vibrated through every rivet in the airframe. Below him, threading through the Alpine foothills like a steel serpent, a German armored column stretched for 3 miles. Tanks, half-tracks, supply trucks, and staff cars all moving with desperate urgency toward the crumbling Eastern Front. "Viper leader to Viper flight," Mac's voice crackled through the radio, steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Target confirmed. German column. Grid reference Baker 7-3. 850s loaded and ready. We're going in hot." Through the bombardier's greenhouse nose of the Invader, Lieutenant Danny Kowalski counted the vehicles, his bombardier's eye calculating distances and lead times with practiced precision. "I make it 60-plus vehicles, Mac. Concentrated fire pattern. We hit them head-on, they'll be boxed in by their own wreckage." Mac pushed the yoke forward, feeling the Invader's nose drop with predatory grace. This was March 1945, and the Third Reich was dying, but dying things were often the most dangerous. The column below represented Germany's last gasps, equipment and men being shuttled east to stem the Soviet tide, or perhaps west to make a final stand against Patton's advancing army. Either way, Mac's job was simple: erase them. The 8.50 caliber Brownings mounted in the Invader's nose represented the most concentrated forward-firing armament of any aircraft in the American arsenal. 4 guns in the solid nose, 4 more and packs beneath the fuselage, each capable of spitting 750 rounds per minute of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. When all 8 guns fired in unison, the Invader became less an aircraft and more a flying chainsaw, capable of reducing trucks to scrap and punching through the deck armor of lightly armored vehicles with horrifying efficiency. "Viper 2 through 4, stack high and follow my run," Mac ordered, watching his wingmen, Captains Eddie Bronson, James "Lucky" Patterson, and First Lieutenant Marcus Webb fan out into attack formation. "We've got 1 pass to make this count. Danny, arm all stations." "All stations hot," Kowalski confirmed, his hand resting on the gun trigger. "Range 2,000 yards and closing." The altimeter unwound as Mac brought the Invader screaming down from 8,000 feet. The aircraft had earned its nickname, the Invader, for good reason. Fast, heavily armed, and relatively maneuverable for a light bomber, it excelled at exactly this kind of low-level interdiction work. The Germans below had no idea what was about to hit them. The attack lasted 30 seconds. Mac pulled up hard at the end of his run, the Invader's engine screaming as he climbed away from the target area. Behind him, the German column had ceased to exist as an organized military formation. Fires burned along a 2-mile stretch of road, vehicles lay overturned or blasted apart, and the few survivors who could still move were running for the tree line. "Viper 3 and 4, clean up the stragglers," Mac ordered, banking hard to survey the damage. Lucky Patterson and Marcus Webb made their runs, their guns adding to the destruction. When the last Invader pulled up and away, silence fell over the valley, except for the crackle of burning vehicles and the occasional crack of ammunition cooking off in the fires. "Viper leader to Viper flight, form up on me!" Mac throttled back as his wingmen rejoined the formation. "That's a mission killed, gentlemen. Let's head home." As the 4 Invaders turned west toward their base at Dijon, France, Mac allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The A-26B had proven itself once again, fast enough to catch German columns on the move, heavily armed enough to destroy them in a single pass, and tough enough to absorb the flak and small arms fire that invariably came up from the ground. This was the 3rd such mission in as many days, and Mac's squadron, the 553rd Bombardment Squadron, the Vipers, was building a reputation as one of the most effective interdiction units in the 9th Air Force. But even as they flew west through the gathering dusk, Mac couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something had changed. The war in Europe was winding down, everyone knew it, but the Germans were fighting with increasing desperation. Intelligence reports suggested they were concentrating forces for something, though whether it was a last stand or an attempt to break out to the Alpine redoubt remained unclear. "Mac, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Kowalski's voice interrupted his thoughts. The lieutenant was pointing off to the north, where contrails marked the passage of high-altitude aircraft. Too many contrails, and heading east. "Allied heavies hitting synthetic fuel plants," Mac guessed, but even as he said it, he wasn't certain. The formation seemed wrong somehow, the spacing irregular. "We'll report it when we land. Weather's closing in anyway." The flight back to Dijon took 40 minutes, the invaders cruising at 250 miles per hour at 10,000 feet. Below them, the landscape of eastern France rolled past. Forests, fields, small villages showing the scars of 4 years of occupation. Liberated territory now, but it would take decades for the region to fully recover from what the war had done to it. Dijon Army Airfield appeared ahead, its 2 runways forming a crude X on the plateau above the city. The field had been a Luftwaffe base until August 1944, when Patton's Third Army had swept through the region during Operation Dragoon. Now it housed 3 squadrons of A-26 Invaders, along with support personnel, maintenance crews, and the infrastructure needed to keep modern combat aircraft operational. Mac brought his Invader into the landing pattern, running through his checklist with practiced efficiency. Gear down, flaps extended, mixture rich, props set for landing. The main wheels touched with a chirp of rubber, and Mac let the tail settle before applying gentle brake pressure. The familiar routine of post-flight procedures took over. Throttles to idle, mixtures to cutoff, magnetos off, master switches off. The sudden silence after hours of engine noise always felt unnatural. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft as soon as it stopped moving. Chief Master Sergeant Thomas Wrench Henderson, the squadron's chief mechanic, was already climbing up on the wing before Mac had finished unbuckling his harness. "How'd she run, Major?" Wrench asked, his weathered face creased with concern. At 45, Wrench was old for a frontline mechanic, but he'd forgotten more about radial engines than most mechanics would ever know. "Like a dream," Mac replied, hauling himself out of the cockpit. His legs felt stiff after 3 hours in the air, and his ears rang from the gun noise. "Starboard engine's running a little rough around 2,000 RPM. Might want to check the mag timing." "Already on my list," Wrench confirmed, making notes on his clipboard. "We've got replacement ammo cans standing by. You boys went through your load pretty quick." "One pass, one column." The Krauts never knew what hit them. Debriefing took place in a converted hangar that now served as the Squadron Operations Center. Captain Jeremy Walsh, the intelligence officer, listened intently as Mac and his pilots described in the mission, marking locations on a large-scale map of Bavaria and Western Austria. "That's the 3rd column we've hit in this sector," Walsh observed, tapping the map with his pointer. "Intelligence thinks they're concentrating forces around Berchtesgaden. The Alpine redoubt theory is looking more credible." "Or they're just trying to avoid getting crushed between us and the Russians," Eddie Bronson suggested. The captain was a lanky Texan with a handlebar mustache that violated at least 3 uniform regulations. "Either way, they're moving a lot of hardware east." "Which is why we'll be flying double missions tomorrow," Walsh announced, producing groans from the assembled pilots. "Group wants maximum effort. We've got good weather forecasted, and Intel has identified at least 6 more high-value targets in the operational area." Mac exchanged glances with his pilots. Double missions meant twice the risk, twice the fatigue, and twice the chance of mechanical failure or enemy action catching up with them. But it also meant twice the impact on German logistics. And at this stage of the war, every truck destroyed, every tank knocked out, was one less obstacle between the Allied armies and Berlin. "What about fighter cover?" Lucky Patterson asked. The captain had earned his nickname not through good fortune, but through a string of narrow escapes that defied probability, including a forced landing behind German lines and a 3-day trek back to friendly territory. P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group will provide top cover for the morning missions, Walsh explained. The afternoon sorties will have P-47 support. We're also coordinating with British Typhoons for suppression of flak positions along the primary approach routes. The briefing continued for another hour. covering intelligence updates, weather forecasts, maintenance status, and personnel matters. By the time Mac emerged into the cool evening air, full darkness had fallen over the airfield. The sound of engines being run up in the maintenance hangars echoed across the tarmac, a constant reminder that the war machine never truly slept. His quarters, shared with Eddie Bronson, occupied a corner of a requisitioned French farmhouse on the edge of the field. The original owners had been compensated and relocated, though whether they'd return after the war remained an open question. The two-room space held little more than cots, footlockers, a small table, and a wood-burning stove that provided minimal heat on cold nights. Mac found Eddie already there, writing a letter by candlelight. The Texan looked up as Mac entered, setting down his pen. "Writing to Sarah again?" Mac asked, referring to Eddie's fiancée back in Houston. "Trying to explain why I can't tell her what I do," Eddie replied with a wry smile. "She thinks I'm flying supplies to the front. Doesn't have any idea we're shooting up German columns every other day." "Probably better that way," Mac said, shrugging off his flight jacket. "What she doesn't know can't make her worry. How about you? You ever think about writing to anyone back home?" Mac paused, the question touching on territory he usually avoided. "Not really. My parents are gone, no siblings, no sweetheart waiting. The squadron's my family now." Eddie nodded, understanding in his eyes. Many of the men who flew combat missions had similar stories. Either they'd lost connection with civilian life, or civilian life had lost connection with them. The experience of war created a gulf that letters and furloughs couldn't fully bridge. "You think we'll make it to Berlin?" Eddie asked. "The ground pounders will. Our job's to make sure they get there with as little opposition as possible. Every German truck we destroy is one less carrying ammunition to the front. Every tank we knock out is one less shooting at Allied soldiers. Still feels weird shooting up men who can't shoot back effectively. Like hunting. It's war," I said simply. "And the Germans had their chance to hunt Allied columns in France back in 1940. Turnabout's fair play." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The candle burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the rough plaster walls. Somewhere in the distance, an aircraft engine coughed to life, sputtered, then caught with a roar before settling into a steady idle. The sounds of the airfield at night, mechanical, purposeful, unending. Mac thought about the German soldiers he'd killed earlier that day. They'd had names, families, hopes and fears just like anyone else. But they'd also worn the uniform of a regime that had plunged the world into war, that had committed atrocities across Europe that had to be stopped at any cost. The mathematics of war were brutal but simple. Kill the enemy before they kill you. Destroy their supplies before they can be used against your own forces. Press the advantage until victory is achieved. You ever wonder what we'll do after? Eddie's question broke the silence again. After the war, I mean. When we don't have missions to fly and Germans to shoot at. Mac considered the question. He'd flown with the Army Air Forces since 1942, first in training, then in B-25 Mitchells in the Mediterranean theater, and finally in A-26 Invaders in France and Germany. Flying had become his life, combat his purpose. The prospect of a world without either seemed strangely empty. "Guess we'll figure it out when we get there," he said finally. "For now, we've got a war to win." Eddie nodded and returned to his letter. Mac stretched out on his cot, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring more missions, more German columns to intercept, more lives to take in the name of ending the war. The A-26B Invader was proving to be exactly what the Army Air Forces had hoped for, a fast, heavily armed attack bomber capable of operating at low level in contested airspace. And Mac and his fellow pilots were learning to use that capability with devastating effect. But beneath the satisfaction of successful missions and the camaraderie of squadron life, Mac felt the weight of what they were doing. Every war required someone to do the killing, and the A-26B pilots had become very, very good at it. The 8.50 caliber machine guns in the nose weren't just weapons. They were instruments of destruction so effective that a single pass could erase an entire column from existence. That power came with responsibility, and the burden of that responsibility settled heavily on Mac's shoulders as sleep finally claimed him. Dawn came early to Dijon Army Airfield, marked by the distant rumble of engines warming up and the shrill blast of the operations officer's whistle. Mac rolled out of his cot at 0445 hours, his body moving through the morning routine with mechanical precision despite the fog of insufficient sleep. Eddie was already up, shaving in cold water from their helmet, his reflection distorted in the small mirror propped against the window. "Morning briefing at 0530 hours, Eddie said around a mouthful of shaving cream. "Walsh says we've got good targets lined up." Mac grunted acknowledgement and pulled on his uniform, the wool itchy against his skin. March in France meant cold mornings and unpredictable weather, though today promised to be clear based on the stars he could see through the window. Good flying weather meant multiple missions, which meant a long day ahead. The mess hall occupied another requisitioned building, this one a former warehouse that had been subdivided into a kitchen, dining area, and storage. The smell of coffee, real coffee, not the ersatz chicory blend, greeted Mac as he entered, along with the sounds of 24 pilots and crew members eating breakfast and discussing the day's operations. "Mac, over here!" Lucky Patterson waved from a corner table where he sat with Marcus Webb and several other pilots from the squadron. Mac grabbed a tray, powdered eggs, toast, bacon that was mostly fat, and a mug of the precious coffee, and joined them. "Hear about the 386th?" Marcus asked as Mac sat down. The young lieutenant looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. "Lost 2 birds yesterday over Munich. Flak got one, fighters got the other." "The 386th flies B-26 Marauders," Lucky pointed out. "Different mission profile. They go in higher, take more flak. We're down in the weeds where the big guns can't track us." "Small arms and 20mm still work fine down low," Mac reminded them. "Don't get cocky. The Germans may be losing, but they can still kill you if you give them the chance." The conversation shifted to other topics, a poker game that had run until 300 hours, rumors of a USO show coming to the area, speculation about when the war might finally end. Mac listened with half an ear, his mind already running through the day's missions: weather, fuel loads, ammunition states, target priorities, the endless checklist of concerns that defined a combat squadron commander's existence. At 0530 hours precisely, the pilots filed into the operations building for morning briefing. The room fell silent as Colonel Harrison Hammond entered, the group commander's presence instantly commanding attention. Hammond was a veteran of the North African campaign, a barrel-chested officer with iron-gray hair and a reputation for demanding perfection from his squadrons. "Gentlemen, yesterday's missions were highly successful. Between the 3 squadrons of the 416th Bombing Group, we destroyed or damaged approximately 240 German vehicles, knocked out 6 locomotives, and cut rail lines in 14 locations. Command is pleased." A murmur of satisfaction ran through the assembled pilots. Success meant more missions, more trust, more critical targets assigned to the group.
"Today's missions will focus on the Rosenheim-Berchtesgaden corridor," Hammond continued, tapping the large map behind him. "Intelligence indicates significant German movement in this area. We believe they're attempting to establish a defensive line in the Alps. Our job is to prevent them from building up sufficient forces to make that line effective." Captain Walsh took over, providing detailed intelligence. "We've identified 3 high-priority targets. First, a German armored column moving northeast from Munich toward Rosenheim. Estimated strength, 20 tanks, 40 support vehicles. Second, a supply convoy staging at Traunstein, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, spare parts. Third, a rail yard at Prien am Chiemsee with multiple trains loading equipment." The briefing continued for 45 minutes, covering approach routes, flak positions, fighter cover, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. Mac absorbed it all, mentally planning the flights and calculating fuel requirements and weapon loads. The 553rd will take the armored column, Hammond announced. Major MacCallister, you'll lead 2 flights of 4 birds each. Hit them hard and fast. The 554th will hit the supply convoy, and the 555th takes the rail yard. Mac pushed the nose down, feeling the familiar surge as the Invader accelerated into its attack dive. The altimeter unwound, 7,000 feet, 6,000, 5,000. The German column grew larger, individual vehicles becoming distinct. He could see soldiers on the tank decks, staff cars with their antennas visible, supply trucks with canvas covers. At 3,000 feet, the first tracers came up, light stuff, probably 7.92 millimeter machine guns. Mac ignored them, concentrating on his aim point. The lead tank was a Tiger I, its massive 88 millimeter gun making it an immediate priority target. Behind it, a Panther and 2 Pens or 4s, followed by the usual mix of support vehicles. 2,000 feet. Kowalski had his hand on the trigger, waiting for Mac to give the word. "On my mark," Mac said, lining up the shot. 3, 2, 1, mark. The 8 50 calibers opened fire simultaneously, the recoil making the entire aircraft shudder. Tracers lanced downward, converging on the Tiger. The armor-piercing round struck the tank's deck armor, punching through the relatively thin top plates. Sparks flew, then smoke, then a secondary explosion as ammunition cooked off inside the turret. Mac held the trigger down, walking his fire back along the column. The Panther took hits in the engine compartment and erupted in flames. A half-track disintegrated as 50 caliber rounds tore through its thin armor. Supply trucks exploded, fuel and ammunition adding to the destruction. Then they were past the column, pulling up and banking hard left as Eddie's flight made their run. More explosions rippled along the convoy as 32 more 50 caliber guns added to the carnage. In less than a minute, the German column had ceased to exist as a functioning military unit. "Viper leader to Viper flight, reform on me," Mac ordered, scanning the sky for threats. "Viper 5, you've got smoke trailing from your starboard engine." "Copy that, leader," Lieutenant Chris Daniels responded. "Oil pressure's dropping. I'm heading home." "Viper 6, escort him back," Mac said. "Everyone else, we've got another target to hit before we head home." The second target, the supply convoy at Traunstein, was 20 miles northeast. Mac led the reduced formation toward it, maintaining altitude as they transited between target areas. The Germans would know by now that American aircraft were operating in the region, but with their air force largely grounded by lack of fuel and Allied air superiority, there was little they could do about it. "Target in sight," reported Kowalski. "Looks like they're trying to disperse. Vehicles are pulling off the road into the trees." Mac cursed silently. A dispersed target was harder to hit effectively, requiring multiple passes or accepting reduced damage. But the presence of fuel trucks and ammunition carriers in the convoy made it worth the risk. "Viper flight will make individual runs," Mac decided. "Pick your targets carefully, watch for flak positions in those woods." The attacks went in sequentially, each invader diving on the dispersing convoy and raking it with fire. Mac's run caught 3 fuel trucks that had pulled into a small clearing, his 50 calibers igniting them into massive fireballs. Eddie's flight focused on the ammunition carriers, triggering spectacular secondary explosions that echoed across the valley. By the time the last invader pulled off target, the convoy had been reduced to burning wreckage. Mac checked his fuel gauges, enough to get home with a small reserve, and turned the formation west. "Good work, Viper flight. Let's head home." The flight back to Dijon was uneventful, though Mac kept his eyes scanning the sky until they crossed back into French airspace. The landing was routine, each aircraft touching down in turn and taxiing to their revetments. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, refueling, rearming, and performing quick maintenance checks for the afternoon mission. Debriefing revealed the full scope of the morning's success. Between the 2 targets, Viper flight had destroyed or damaged over 70 German vehicles, including 4 tanks, a dozen half-tracks, and numerous supply trucks. The cost? 1 aircraft with engine damage, though Daniels had made it back to base safely, and minor flak damage to 2 others. "Outstanding work," Colonel Hammond said during the debriefing. "The German logistics network in Bavaria is collapsing. Keep up the pressure." Mac nodded, though he felt the weight of exhaustion settling over him. 2 more missions scheduled for the afternoon, then another full day tomorrow. The pace was grueling, but necessary. Every day they delayed gave the Germans more time to organize, more time to dig in, more time to prepare whatever desperate last stand they were planning. He caught a quick lunch in the mess hall, a sandwich and more coffee, then tried to grab an hour's sleep before the afternoon briefing. But sleep wouldn't come, his mind replaying the morning's missions, analyzing what had gone right and what could be improved. The faces of German soldiers flashed through his memory, young men, old men, all dying under the invaders' guns. "Mac, you awake?" Eddie's voice from the doorway. "Unfortunately," Mac replied, sitting up. "What's up?"
Weather's moving in faster than forecast. They're pushing the afternoon missions up by an hour. Briefing in 15 minutes. Mac groaned but hauled himself to his feet. "What's the target?" "Rail yard at Landshut," Eddie said. "Big one, apparently. Lots of rolling stock, repair facilities, the works. Could be a tough nut to crack." They walked to the operations building together, the late morning sun already obscured by high clouds rolling in from the west. The meteorology officer confirmed what Eddie had said, a weather front moving in from the Atlantic expected to bring rain and low clouds by evening. If they wanted to hit the rail yard, it had to be now. The briefing was shorter than usual, focused on the immediate tactical concerns of the mission. The rail yard at Landshut was a major logistics hub for German forces in Bavaria, handling everything from troop trains to supply shipments to equipment transfers. Intelligence estimated at least a dozen locomotives and over 100 cars currently in the yard, making it a target-rich environment. "This one's going to be hot," Captain Walsh warned. "The Germans have reinforced the flak defenses around Landshut. We're talking 88mm guns, 20mm quads, possibly even 105mm heavy stuff. They know we've been hitting rail facilities and they're ready for us." "Then we go in fast and low," Max said. "Standard approach. Come in on the deck, pop up to attack altitude, make one pass, and get out. No loitering, no second passes. Hit them before they can react." Hammond nodded approval. "I'm assigning 12 birds to this one. You're 8 plus 4 from the 554th Squadron. Hit them with everything you've got." The mission launched 30 minutes later, 12 A-26B Invaders lifting off into increasingly cloudy skies. Mac led the formation east, climbing to 15,000 feet to clear the mountains, then descending as they approached the target area. The clouds were thickening, and Mac knew they'd have to navigate by dead reckoning if visibility dropped much further. "Target ahead, 10 miles, Kowalski reported. "I can see the rail yard through breaks in the clouds." Mac studied the terrain below. Landshut sat in a river valley, the rail yard on the south edge of the city. Multiple tracks converged on the yard, with maintenance buildings, roundhouses, and freight terminals visible even from altitude. And surrounding it all, the telltale earth berms and gun positions of a heavily defended facility. "All aircraft, this is Viper Leader. We're going in hot. First flight takes the north side of the yard, second flight takes the south, 554th takes the center. Watch for flak and don't get greedy. One pass, maximum damage, then we're gone." "Viper flight copies," the acknowledgments came back. Mac pushed the nose down, dropping from 15,000 feet in a steep dive. The invaders' airspeed built rapidly, 200 miles per hour, 250, 300. The rail yard rushed up to meet them, growing from a toy model to a massive complex of steel and concrete. At 8,000 feet, the flak started. Bright orange bursts filled the sky, 88mm rounds detonating with lethal precision. Mac jinked the invader left, then right, making himself a harder target. Shrapnel rattled against the fuselage, but nothing vital was hit. 5,000 feet. Mac could see individual locomotives now, duck sits in their maintenance bays. He lined up on a particularly large engine, noting the freight cars clustered around it. 3,000 feet. The flak was a steel curtain now, filling the sky with smoke and fragments. An invader to Mac's left took a direct hit, the aircraft's right engine exploding in a shower of debris. The pilot, Lieutenant Harrison from the 554th, fought to control his aircraft, but gravity was winning. 2,000 feet. Mac pressed the trigger. The 850 cals roared, tracers converging on the locomotive. The heavy rounds punched through the boiler, and superheated steam exploded outward in a white cloud.
Mac walked his fire across the rail yard, destroying everything in his path: freight cars, maintenance equipment, water towers, fuel storage tanks. Then they were through the flak zone and climbing away, the Invader's engines straining as Mac pulled up hard. Behind them, the rail yard was a scene of devastation, fires burning across the entire facility. The other Invaders followed, each adding to the destruction. "Viper 8 is hit," the call came over the radio. "I've got hydraulic failure and my controls are sluggish." Mac looked back, spotting Marcus Webb's aircraft trailing fluid from beneath the fuselage, the hydraulic lines clearly severed by flak fragments. The young lieutenant was fighting his controls, the Invader wallowing through the air like a wounded bird. "Marcus, what's your status?" Mac called, already banking to fall in alongside the damaged aircraft.
"I've got maybe 20% hydraulic pressure and it's dropping," Webb reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Elevators are responding, but the ailerons are mushy. I don't know if I can make it back to Dijon." Mac assessed the situation rapidly. They were 60 miles inside German territory, weather closing in from the west, and Webb's aircraft was bleeding hydraulic fluid at an alarming rate. The standard procedure would be to bail out and hope to evade capture, but Mac had seen what happened to Allied airmen who fell into German hands this late in the war. With their country collapsing around them, German civilians and soldiers alike were often in no mood to take prisoners. "Negative on bailout," Mac decided. "Eddie, take command of the formation and get everyone home. I'm staying with Marcus." "Mac, you can't," Eddie started to protest. "That's an order, Captain. Get our people home. Marcus and I will find somewhere to set down." The other Invaders peeled away, heading west toward France in safety. Mac throttled back, keeping pace with Webb's crippled aircraft. Below them, the Bavarian countryside rolled past. Forests, fields, small villages, all enemy territory. "There's an emergency strip at Mulheim," Kowalski said, studying the map. "It's only 15 miles south, former Luftwaffe training field." "Which means it's probably defended," Mac replied, but he knew they had few options. "Marcus, can you make 15 miles? "I'll try," Webb answered. "Hydraulic pressure is down to 10% now. If it drops much more, I won't be able to control the aircraft at all." Mac guided Webb toward Mulheim, scanning constantly for threats. The cloud ceiling was dropping, which provided some cover, but also made navigation more difficult. They descended to 5,000 feet, then 3,000 feet, staying beneath the overcast. The airfield appeared ahead, a single grass runway with a handful of buildings and what looked like several abandoned German aircraft scattered around the perimeter. No visible defenses, no obvious signs of occupation. It might be their best chance. "Marcus, you're going to have to make this count," Max said. "Put her down on that grass strip. I'll cover you." Webb's Invader dropped toward the field, hydraulic fluid streaming from the damaged aircraft in a fine mist. Max circled overhead, his finger resting on the gun trigger, ready to suppress any ground fire. But the field remained quiet as Webb's aircraft touched down, bounced once, then settled onto the grass with a jarring impact that must have rattled every rivet in the airframe. The Invader rolled to a stop near a cluster of buildings. Mac brought his own aircraft around for a landing, knowing he was making a decision that could cost him everything. Landing in German territory, even to rescue a downed crew member, was against regulations. But regulations were written by people who'd never had to watch a friend die because following orders was more important than doing what was right. His wheels touched grass, and Mac cut the engines immediately, knowing they needed to move fast. German forces could arrive at any moment. "Danny, grab the survival kits and weapons," Mac ordered, already unbuckling his harness. "We're getting Marcus and his crew and getting out of here." Kowalski didn't argue, just grabbed their gear and followed Mac out of the aircraft. They ran toward Webb's Invader, where the crew was already evacuating. Marcus climbed down from the cockpit, followed by his bombardier, Lieutenant Ray Chin, and their gunner, Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien. "My bird's done," Marcus said, looking back at the aircraft with evident pain. "Even if we had hydraulics, I bent something in that landing. She won't fly again." "Then we destroy her and use mine. Ray, Mike, set charges in Marcus's aircraft. Use the flares and any ammunition you can't carry. I want it burning in 5 minutes." While the crew prepared demolition charges, Max studied their situation. They were deep in enemy territory with 1 aircraft, 6 men, and limited supplies. The weather was closing in rapidly, which meant flying back to Dijon would be increasingly difficult. But staying here was certain death or capture. "We've got company," Kowalski said quietly, pointing toward the tree line. Mac turned to see figures emerging from the forest, German soldiers, maybe 20 of them, advancing cautiously toward the airfield.
They'd been spotted. "Everyone in my aircraft now," Mac ordered. "Forget the demolition, we're leaving." The 6 men ran for Mac's Invader. Behind them, shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Mac reached the aircraft first, climbing up and hauling himself into the cockpit. Kowalski piled into the bombardier's position, while the others crowded into the small crew compartment behind the cockpit. Mac hit the starter for the port engine, the Pratt & Whitney coughed, sputtered, then roared into life. He immediately started the starboard engine, not waiting for proper warm-up procedures. Speed was everything now.
More shots. A bullet clanged off the fuselage. Mac released the brakes and shoved the throttles forward, the Invader lurching into motion. They weren't properly positioned for takeoff. They were sitting sideways to the runway, German soldiers between them and the best takeoff path. "Hold on!" Mac shouted, and aimed the aircraft directly at the advancing Germans. The 8.5 caliber machine guns in the nose pointed straight ahead. Mac's thumb found the trigger. The guns erupted, tracers lashing out at the German soldiers. Men scattered, diving for cover as armor-piercing rounds tore through the air where they'd been standing. Mac kept the trigger pressed, using the guns to clear a path, even as the Invader picked up speed across the grass. 50 miles per hour, 60. The Germans were behind them now, still shooting but no longer in their path. 70 miles per hour. The tree line at the end of the field was approaching rapidly. "Mac, we're running out of field," Kowalski shouted from below. 80 miles per hour. Not quite enough for takeoff, but it would have to do. Mac pulled back on the yoke, feeling the Invader struggle to break free of the ground. The main wheels lifted, settled back, lifted again. They were flying, barely, the aircraft mushing through the air just above stall speed. The trees rushed toward them. Mac held the yoke back, willing the Invader to climb. The treetops passed beneath them with feet to spare, branches actually scraping the belly of the aircraft. Then they were clear, climbing into the overcast, the German soldiers and the abandoned airfield disappearing behind them. "Everyone okay back there?" Mac called over his shoulder. A chorus of affirmatives came back, along with some shaky laughter. They'd made it out, but they were still 60 miles from friendly territory, flying an overloaded aircraft in deteriorating weather with German air defenses between them and home. "Set course for Dijon," Mac ordered Kowalski. "We'll stay low beneath the cloud deck. Maybe we can slip through without being spotted." The flight back was tense, every moment expecting flak bursts or the appearance of German fighters. But their luck held. The weather that was making flying difficult was also keeping the Luftwaffe on the ground. They crossed the Rhine without incident, and the French countryside appeared below them like a promised land. Dijon Tower granted immediate clearance when Mac radioed in, and ground crews rushed out to meet them as the Invader touched down. Colonel Hammond was waiting as the crew climbed out, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Major MacCallister, what the hell were you thinking landing in German territory?" Hammond demanded. "I was thinking I wasn't leaving one of my men behind, sir," Mac replied, meeting the colonel's eyes steadily. "Court-martial me if you want, but I'd do it again." Hammond's expression softened slightly. "I should court-martial you. Instead, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. You and your crew just pulled off one of the ballsiest rescues I've heard of." He paused, then added, "But don't ever do it again. We can't afford to lose pilots like you." The war in Europe ended 6 weeks later. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and the guns finally fell silent across the continent. The 553rd Bombardment Squadron had flown their last combat mission 3 days earlier, destroying a German supply dump near Munich in what would be their final act of the war. Mac stood on the flight line at Dijon, watching his ground crews begin preparing the A-26B Invaders for their journey back to the United States. Some would be retained for training or potential use in the Pacific theater, though with the war against Japan winding down, that seemed increasingly unlikely. Most would end up in storage or scrapped, their wartime service over. "It's strange, isn't it?" Eddie Bronson said, walking up beside him. 6 weeks ago, we were fighting for our lives every day. Now we're planning what to do with our leave time." Mac nodded. The transition from war to peace was jarring in ways he hadn't expected. The squadron had lost 12 pilots killed in action, another 8 wounded badly enough to be sent home, and dozens of crew members to various combat injuries. They destroyed over 800 German vehicles, knocked out 37 locomotives, and cut rail lines in over 100 locations. The cost had been high, but the contribution to victory was real. "What are you going to do?" Mac asked, "after we're discharged?" "Go home to Sarah, get married, probably go to college on the GI Bill. Try to be normal again, whatever that means. You?" He thought about it. Flying had become his life, combat his purpose. But there was more to life than war, and he was slowly beginning to remember what that might be. Maybe I'll stick with flying. Airlines are going to need pilots. Or maybe I'll get into business. I've got time to figure it out.
Danny Kowalski appeared, carrying a bottle of champagne he'd somehow acquired. "The colonel has approved a celebration tonight. No more missions, no more Germans to shoot at, and we all survived. Time to toast the end of the war." As the sun set over Dijon Army Airfield, the men of the 553rd Bombardment Squadron gathered for their final celebration as a combat unit. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of demobilization, of transforming from warriors back into civilians. But tonight, they were still Viper Squadron, still brothers in arms, still the men who'd flown the A-26B Invader through the most dangerous skies in the world and lived to tell the tale. Mac raised his glass, looking around at the faces of the men who'd become his family. "To the squadron," he said simply. "To the friends we lost and to the future we won." "To the squadron," the voices echoed back. And in that moment, with the war over and peace finally within reach, Mac felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The world ahead would be different, perhaps better, and they'd all played their part in making that possible. The A-26B Invader had been their weapon, their shield, and their salvation. Now it would become a memory, a symbol of a time when ordinary men had done extraordinary things. The war was over. They'd survived, and that, Mac realized, was victory enough. If you enjoyed this story, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with anyone who appreciates detailed historical fiction and aviation history. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next epic tale, because we have more incredible stories coming that I think you're going to love. Your support means everything and allows us to continue creating these deep-dive narrative experiences. Drop a comment below letting me know what you thought of Mac's story and if there are other aircraft, battles, or historical periods you'd like to see explored in future episodes. Until next time, thank you for watching, and remember, these stories honor the real heroes who served. Fair skies and following winds.